Mr. Panetta, thank you very much for joining us at The World.
Good to be with you, Philip.
Are you concerned about what China has been doing over the last couple of months? And do you think there is a risk that could mean, whether by design or by accident, actual conflict involving the US and China?
Well, I worry about the vacuum that occurs in the world in the absence of United States leadership. The approach of the president to withdraw from a leadership role in the world and to try to retreat to an America First mentality has really not only harmed our credibility and leadership, but has provided a vacuum for others to assert their leadership. And that's exactly what China is doing. I think China not only sees the vulnerability of the United States in terms of our lack of world leadership, but also as a result of COVID-19, sees an opportunity to take advantage of their ability to exert greater authority and greater power around the world. And I think what they did in Hong Kong and making the move in Hong Kong to assert greater control, I think is a reflection of that. We are concerned about Taiwan, doing the same thing in Taiwan. We're concerned about the South China Sea and the continuing militarization of China in the South China Sea. I'm concerned that China continues to try to expand its influence diplomatically, financially, and in every other way to take advantage of this opportunity. So China, without question, represents a threat, I think, to the stability of the world. And for that reason, the United States has to be, along with our allies like Australia and others, I think we have to work together to make sure that we protect the ability of particularly the nations in the Pacific. I remember once sitting down with President Xi and having a discussion with him when I was Secretary of Defense, in which he objected to the United States deploying our forces to the Pacific. And I said, we are a Pacific power, just like you are. And he made a point. He said, yeah, we ought to be working for peace and prosperity. That was the Xi of a few years ago. I'm not sure whether it's the Xi of the present, but I do believe that we ought to be working together with the Chinese to promote peace and prosperity.
That implies a level of trust. Is that warranted at the moment, the way China is?
I always operate on the basis that that you negotiate and you conduct diplomacy from a position of strength. We need to build our alliances in the Pacific with friends like Australia and Japan and South Korea and other Southeast Asian countries. And that we have to be very clear with China. There are lines we will not allow them to cross, particularly in the South China Sea, that they have to abide by international rules that allow freedom of the seas and the ability of all nations to be able to use those seas in order to conduct free trade and in order to conduct free passage. China, particularly in terms of its human rights, ought to be not incarcerating their people into concentration camps, but ought to be giving them the opportunity to participate in a growing economy and not penalize them for who they are.
Now, you've seen the comments from John Bolton. The president didn't mind the imprisonment of 1 million people, and that as long as he wanted help with his election. What do you make of that encounter?
The power of the United States rests not just in our military power, but it rests in our values. When the president is willing to cast aside those values, I think that is a violation of everything that the United States should be standing for. And it hurts us. It hurts us in terms of our credibility in the world when the president of the United States is willing to sit down and, in exchange for the president of China supporting his reelection efforts, is willing to overlook those kinds of abuses. That's against every principle that past presidents have stood for when it comes to foreign policy.
What then if President Trump is reelected?
I'm not sure I have an answer to that right now because, the hope is based on the polls that, and the falling polls for the president, that he's in trouble with the American people and that there's a good chance that Joe Biden will be elected. If something should go wrong and President Trump be reelected, then I think the American people are going to have to continue to exert their support for the proper checks and balances in our system to make sure that this president is restricted and limited in terms of what he wants to accomplish.
You'd understand that Australia, we have deep economic interests with China, but deep strategic interests with the United States. Can we have both going forward, do you think, given China's current attitude to the world?
I think the approach has to be that leadership from Australia, from the United States, from Japan, from South Korea, I think countries have to come together and form a much stronger alliance that makes clear to the Chinese that they will not have their way in the Pacific. That if they want to move forward, they have to move forward in partnership with all of those countries that are willing to respect the rights of people, but more importantly, respect free trade and respect the rights of governments to be able to develop their own economies as they wish. I think the countries in Southeast Asia and Australia have very strong economies that are growing. I think this is an opportune time to build the kind of strong alliance there that makes clear to the Chinese that either they play by the rules or they're not going to be allowed to play at all. That message needs to be sent.